Okay. So our final is Monday, a week from today at 3 p.m. There are going to be 50 questions. And unlike the midterm and unlike our quizzes, I'm not doing any short answers and I'm not doing any short essay questions. They're all going to be multiple choice and true, false. You're going to have your own exam that you can write on, put stars next to if you want to come back to it. A couple of people I've noticed have not answered all of the questions on some of our quizzes, and that's obviously disappointing to get that back and see something marked wrong because you didn't even take a guess or fill in. So make sure that you do that. And then something else that I've noticed this semester more than I have in the past, I mean, I've always noticed this, but even more so this semester, and that's people erasing the correct answer and then picking another answer. And to me, when I'm grading it, it feels bad because I can see that you had the right answer first off and changed it. And, but I did want to just say that many of the researchers who study how we take exams say that very often it's your first inclination that is the right answer. So if you're not sure, you might stick with that first inclination. And another thought, it's final season, and that means you have all kinds of stuff due and final exams. And if everybody has a limited amount of time, and spend more time on chapters 11 and 13 than on chapters 7 and 8. That's just a little suggestion for you. All right, here we go. I'm going to go right into it. Chapter 7. So there's a question that's a multiple choice that comes up about organizational structure. Oh, I should also say this. I'm not going to provide this PowerPoint presentation as a study tool, except for this. So if you want to record it or put it on your phone or just take copious notes, I would suggest that, but I'm not going to provide it in the class shell. Most of these are already in the class shell. And then there are a couple of things that I've added, which are basically the answer to the test questions. And so you should do whatever works for you other than having it in the class shell. So there you have it. So what is an organizational structure? We think about organizational structure, and the reason that we even have a structure is so that we can get the job done. The structure allows us to have clear lines of communication. It allows us to produce if we're producing. It's a really important basis. It's one of the very first decisions you make as a business. If you're a small business and you're putting together a product, you might first think, oh, this is a great idea. But then right away, you start looking at the structure, because if you don't have a good structure, then a lot of times the business is not successful. So another way you can look at this is that it's a system that has lines of authority and all of these things that we see in business. One of the first questions on the final is about unity of command. And remember that the functional or vertical type organizations that we have seen historically and still see like crazy today include this unity of command. If you have a boss, you're supposed to go to your boss. You're not supposed to skip up 2 levels of bosses and go to them. That's really frowned upon. You stick to the unity of command and do your best within that structure, because that's what it's designed to do. I remember I had a job at one point, and I was in a lot of different groups, and so things would come up, but I would always have to go back to my boss and say, hey, I was at this meeting and I brought this up to that person, because my boss hated any thought of other people talking about something and she didn't know about it. And it took me a minute, and then I got it and made sure that she never felt that way, because I wanted to respect the unity of command and also keep things in the workplace going smoothly. So what is not on the PowerPoint slides is the 7 to 10 subordinates. So historically and proven through research, managers do best when they have 7 to 10 people reporting to them. And this makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Not every business does this. Some businesses will have 20 people report to them, or even more sometimes. But the more people that you have reporting to you, the less of a good job you're able to do, because it includes more work. And so 7 to 10 is that magic number that I'm looking for on the final, but also for you in your career. That is the sweet spot. And I have 1 or 2 questions on the midterm about tall versus flat structure. Remember, the tall is the one that we're very accustomed to because it's still in 2021 the most common. And then the flat structure is what we're seeing more of over the past decade. And in your career, you will continue to see more of this, is a flattened hierarchy. And they both have their own benefits. And a lot of people do well in the tall structure because they know they have one person to report to, and it's easier and everything is clearer. That has historically been the way it is, and why many people in this class too, because I read your deliverables, a lot of people said, hey, I think it sounds interesting to be in a flattened hierarchy, but I know myself and I would do best in a tall structure. So centralization and decentralization go with that tall and flattened structures. Centralization is where we have a clear place to go. And there's 1 or 2 questions about this on the final exam. Decentralization is more of the creative, the flattened. That's where the authority is spread out amongst many people at lower levels. And one of the things we talked about in class was, if we were building an application, it would make a lot of sense to be in a decentralized organization, because we need to have the tech people right there, and we need to be able to talk right to them without having to go to their boss through my boss. And then we need to have the marketing team right there. We need to have the financial people right there. So we don't have to go through all these time-consuming levels like we might see in a centralized organization. Does anybody have any questions on this? If you have a question, just a reminder, please unmute your microphone and jump right in. I welcome questions. I put a lot of slides together and I wanted to cover them, so I'm just going to keep going. But please feel free. And if you're having a question, the chances are that somebody else is as well. So this came up, that first bullet point came up on one of our quizzes. If there is a lot of uncertainty in an organization, it could be because it's a decentralized organization and not as many people are in charge, because almost everybody is in charge. When you have that flattened hierarchy, W.L. Gore is known for this. I don't think they even call their people managers. I think they just have team members, and they try to create a culture of equalness, as opposed to knowing that that person is the vice president and I report to him, but first I report to my boss. And that's how it is in the Frankie College, and at most universities, it's like that as well, and most organizations for that matter. So just know what a functional structure is. And that's where we have all of the marketing people in one department, all of the financial people in another department. And know also that a functional structure is in line with a tall structure or a traditional structure, because usually you'll have each of these departments and they'll all have a manager, and that manager will report to another manager who reports to the CEO. And remember about 3 weeks ago where we drew those organizational charts, and we did one chart that the consultant was recommending for the supermarket, and we did another chart for how the supermarket was. You can see that a functional structure is a lot different, and it can have its benefits, to be sure, but this again lines up with the more traditional businesses that we see. So the matrix approach, this is where you're going to have a couple of different bosses, because you're combining these two different functions or systems or structures. And then it does have some flexibility here, and we're seeing it because for many organizations it can work, but for the employee it can be confusing, especially if the communication is different from one boss than it is from another. And at some point that is going to happen. I know they try to be on the same page with managing to reduce the confusion, but matrix structures can be confusing. That's the greatest complaint of employees. So I do want you to refresh yourself on what is the ambidextrous approach. And the idea is basically that you are trying to create an environment where new ideas can happen and creativity. So you're still having that traditional tall structure that I've already talked about, but within that, you're creating these new ways to inspire creativity. And so this is what's known as the ambidextrous approach. So I need your attention for a second. I changed a couple of things on the midterm study guide this afternoon. So if you downloaded it already, you might just compare it. I just eliminated a couple of things on it, like force field analysis, types of production I eliminated, and then I added upward and downward communication because we'll get to that, but I'm talking about that soon. I figured a lot of people may not have downloaded or looked at that midterm study guide yet, but if you're wanting to, just compare it with what you already downloaded because I made some changes. So maybe you're catching on that when I'm highlighting something, that's because that's on the final exam. I'm sure you're already there, but just a little nudge. Most managers think and believe that a huge amount of the information within the workforce that's valuable for organizations is coming from the bottom. It's not trickling down from the top, it's coming from the bottom and working its way up. And if you know that as a manager, that's really great because you should know what's happening within your organization and not just ignore things because they filtered up. Because as a manager or leader, you see what you see, but it's impossible to see everything. When we talked about this in class, we talked about the bottom-up approach as a way for managers to kind of embrace people on the bottom. But the question on the final exam is that, and then the idea that not only do we embrace the people who are on that entry level, but we recognize that so much of what's important is coming up from there. So innovation by acquisition, and there's a bunch of things about innovation, and I'm only taking out the ideas that I want you to study for the final. But this idea of an organization, remember, we talked about the need for change. Change must happen. There's just no way we're going to get around it in any field, because that is the nature of the world we live in. And one of the ways to do that is by acquiring a new, fresh company. Because if you're a company that's been around forever, you probably have been around forever because you have some really good ideas. They're solid. It's probably a tall structure. But there are a lot of things that you probably just can't do. Like, you might not be able to compete with an organization like Amazon or another technology company. So by acquiring a small up-and-coming company, then you can bring those people and those ideas into the fold, and then you can advance. It's usually technologically that we're seeing this, but you can move forward as an organization because you have acquired a new company that has this energy and these thoughts and ideas. So this comes up that a really important way for expanding and growing is by acquiring small companies. I also want you to know what is an idea champion. And it's different from a change agent, which we had on our quiz 2 quizzes ago. A change agent, it's not on the final, but that person comes in, examines, and they're generally an outsider and says what you should do to change and be successful. But an idea champion is an internal individual, and they are really good at seeing the potential in things. So I had mentioned that I had a really good idea for a class, and that our associate dean in the Franke College was being my idea champion. I told him about it. He's like, that's a great idea. And so he is moving forward with a lot of the things that I can't do because of his position. And that is an example of an idea champion, and they're super valuable in the workplace. All right, please know the definition of leadership. Leadership is when we are trying to influence people so we can get where we're trying to go. And it's different than management. Management is super important as well. It's about making sure that the systems are working the way they should. But leadership is a higher level of thinking and action because you're actually moving an organization forward. So this word humility is on the final, and it's the opposite of being an egomaniac. It's a person that has an open mind and an open heart. And a lot of people hear the word humility and they think of humiliation, but they are not the same. Humility is what we'll see in a servant leader, a person who leads not because they think they're better than others, but really because they recognize that they too are just human and they're all just doing the best that they can. So the question is something along the lines of what is the opposite of ego in a leader or something like that. And I want people to think about humility more than just an answer to a final exam question, but for yourself and what it means in your life and how it may help you to be a better leader in the world. So interactive leadership Now, if you didn't even read this in the textbook, but you just thought about it, the word describes what it is. Interactive. That means you and me together, we're interacting. And that kind of a leadership really works well. It works well because people, when they're more engaged, are more likely to be good followers and good employees. So this is a type of influence, really. And chapter 11 talks about influence because leaders influence, and there are lots of different ways to influence. You can just be a certain kind of person and people will follow your lead because they respect you. And interactive leadership is getting there by knowing your employees, by participating in their lives. The word apathetic leader is not on the final, but we talked about it in class. Apathetic leaders are horrible because they just don't care about you and they don't care about the organization. But when you get an interactive leader, they're the ones that are going to jump right in there next to you and get the job done with you. And that kind of a leader gets people who care, because if my leaders care, then I am much more likely to care as well. So there are 2 questions on the final exam about the difference between male and female leadership. And it's pretty interesting because the primary author of the textbook is male, but you could tell from reading it that he says, well, he's quoting research, but thinks that women are especially good leaders. And that's just my take on his writing in the textbook. But what do you need to know about this? I think I have a table next. Yes, I do. So you need to know that while everybody who is a leader, you would hope, is trying to get the job done and get it done as well as possible. But the reason that women are rated more highly in certain areas are because some of the things that are required in leadership, like bringing people together, like that interactional leadership that I just talked about, those are things that women do a little bit more naturally. I know some men do too. I hate just hard and fast generalizations, but women are more nurturing, which is a trait of leaders. They're helping others to progress in their career, which is a higher level of leadership. Because the higher levels of leadership, which are the transformational, I'll get to that in a second, and servant leadership, those are just really high things that we aspire to. Not very many people really fit that bill, but they care more about reaching a goal. They care about helping people be the very best versions of themselves. And that's pretty cool. So these are some of the gender differences that are talked about in the textbook. And then I think you can see the highlighted part at the bottom. Women tend to process information out loud when making decisions. I know plenty of men who do that too. So it's not either or, but it's just, this is based on research. So my own research is in a different level. So if you just take a second and think to yourself, what is the difference between management and leadership? That's going to help you to answer some questions that might come up on the test. What does a manager do? You know, a manager is the person who's signing off on your vacation. The manager is making sure that your equipment is all working. The manager is scheduling regular meetings. And the leader is maybe doing some of those things, but really more focused broadly. And they're looking at stakeholder relationships like we talked about in class. They're looking to connect with other community members and create partnerships. These are different skill sets, but all very, very important. And it wasn't for me until later in my life that I realized I was a good manager. I didn't really care about being a manager when I was younger, but part of it was just getting older and having a better discipline with myself. And then also mastering procrastination and some other things that were part of my younger version. To really being organized and being able to manage. So just different traits altogether. So there's a multiple choice question that comes up, and it talks about somebody has a job opening and they're looking for this and they're looking for that in a person and they're looking for another thing in a person. And the things that they're looking for are all considered traits, which is the answer on that question. But more than just giving the answer, I do want to say that traits are characteristics and qualities of a leader, and they're super important. We all have our own list of traits that we bring. And when you are hiring other people down the road, you're going to know exactly the traits that you need because you'll understand your culture and you'll want to find a person whose traits will not just match what you're doing, but help elevate your organization. So we do know that we've talked a little bit about this in class. We talked about, I asked everybody to, I put just a couple questions up on a PowerPoint, and we were looking at the type of leaders that we are. Some of us were more detail oriented. Some of us were more political. Each of these are individual to us, and they're different strengths that we have in the workplace. I don't really need you to know what this heading is, but I do want you to know about the definition for the word consideration as it's used in our textbook for managing people. And consideration is kind of like that interactional or the leadership style. Consideration basically means that while you're definitely focused on the bottom line, because you must be, that's how it works to stay successful over time, you also have this degree of consideration. And this is a focus on your people. And the more that you have this focus, the better able that you're able to reach those goals, because we know that especially in today's environment where there are a lot more job openings, people are leaving because they think that it's greener at another place. The people want leaders they can trust. That's number one. And then after that, they want to work for people and with people who are respectful of them. So when I think of the word consideration, it's respect and then some. It's how are you? What did you do over Thanksgiving? It's a type of leadership that really helps elevate organizations, because when you have this, it's ingrained in the culture, and then you have a much stronger workforce, and then you're much better able to reach your goals. Any questions here? So I think there are 1 or 2 questions out of 50 that talk about the different types of leaders. A charismatic leader is a person who can truly motivate others, and motivating others is not very easy. A lot of times you can get people to buy into a change, but actually motivating them to do more is huge. And charismatic leaders are especially known for this ability. You don't need to know this, it's an aside, but charismatic leaders can also be the kinds that are the criminals. Trying to find a more gentle word, but some of the people who have pulled off amazing Ponzi schemes and such, they're very charismatic, and people want to follow them, and people want to do what they say. But this textbook's not talking about the dark side of charismatic and charisma. They're just saying that these leaders have a lot to do with guiding an organization, leading an organization because of their personality. A transformational leader is similar, although they might not have the same degree of over-the-top personality, but they still are really strong leaders. And what they do is they have a vision, and their vision is so strong, and they also care about people in a really solid way, that they're able to bring about monumental changes in industries and in workplaces, and they guide change. There is a question called a transactional leader on the final exam, and it's about give and take. So a transaction is, I give you this, you give me that. You do all this extra work for me, work 70 hours this week for me so we can reach our deadline, and I will give you a 5-day weekend. That is an example of just a really straightforward transition. But what you need to know is that transactions include rewards. So that can be monetary, time off, or any other type of reward in exchange for something. Go ahead.
Would a transformational leader be something like Steve Jobs, where he wasn't necessarily a charismatic person, but he pushed something forward?
He's one of the best examples, Cherie. Thank you for that. He did. I mean, whether you love him or hate him, he changed the world. And for sure. So just by the definition of a transformation, he created a transformation. He created an industry. Although some people may want to argue with me, I drank the Kool-Aid. So there you have it. Yes, Cherie, thank you for that. He's a very excellent example. So there are 2 questions on the final exam about followers. And what do you need to know about followers? Mostly you're being asked to talk about, to identify if somebody is just going to work and doing what their boss tells them to do without looking at it at all. They just do it because that's their job. Then that's an example of uncritical thinking. An employee who is not critical and just gets the job done. You know, I tend to have friends, and I have one in particular. She lives in San Luis Obispo, but she's quitting her job right now. And for sure, she's overqualified. She just is. but she knows so much that she can't just go there and be an uncritical worker. And that's exactly what they want. They want somebody who's not thinking, just does the work, because there's a lot of work to do. But she has so much education and so much experience that when she sees really basic things that are done poorly, she says, we could save ourselves a whole bunch of time by just making this one tweak. And they just don't want a critical thinker. They want this uncritical thinker. So she's given her notice. But what do you need to know? That there's different types of followers. Some are more questioning and some are not going to question because they've got a lot of other things on their mind and they're happy just to do what they're told. So these are the, sorry, I'm coughing a lot still. Really, I think both of the questions on the test are just about the types of employees who are not critical. They're dependent, uncritical thinking. And a pragmatic survivor, I'm trying to remember, I don't think I put that question on there, but that's the person who just does whatever. I guess I'm kind of like that type of a person a lot of times in the workplace. I just do what needs to be done as a matter of survival. I want to do a good job, and I definitely won't do something unethical, but I'm probably not the person out there rocking the boat because that's just not my style. So I'm kind of right there in the middle. Definitely educated about the issues, just more in the middle of all of these things. So yeah, I think, I can't remember and I'm sorry, but put that down in your notes to be sure that you know what is a pragmatic survivor as well as an uncritical thinking employee. Here it is in bullet form. And I do have all of the slides in the final exam study guide, which is on the side menu of Blackboard. The slides aren't very detailed, so I added some things for this final exam study session. All right, so interpersonal influence. Now, we all do this for our lives, and we all do it to one degree or another. A person who's a little more political in the workplace might do it a little bit more. So we know that power is one of the ways that we influence others. And it's not a bad thing. It's just the way that things always have been as long as humans have been moving around, and probably in the animal kingdom as well. It's a part of nature, power, and it's definitely a part of the workplace. And I do want you to know what are the tactics for interpersonal influence, so you could pick them out of a multiple choice question. And another way to look at this is networking, because a lot of this is about networking. And the helping people like you. Again, I was talking just a little while ago about the types of leaders that really care about developing others. And a lot of people will feel a natural inclination to do that. They think, I got to be where I am because others helped me, and now I will help others. But this is all a part of, in the science of management, part of the interpersonal influence. So there are 2 and maybe 3 questions about the types of power that are in the workplace, and this comes out of chapter 11. Legitimate power. If you're the boss, you have legitimate power. That's just what it is. I do what you tell me to do because you're my boss. That's an example of legitimate power. Even if I don't respect you, you have the power, so I do it. Reward power is I give you this if you give me that, which is a transactional, but so it doesn't necessarily have the transaction in it. It just is that I have the power to reward you. So this is where my power comes from, is I am holding the carrot and you would like it. Coercive power, you might remember this from when we talked about this earlier in the semester in another chapter, but there are certain leaders and managers who are just, oh, that's what it was. It was when we were talking about Kohlberg's stages of moral development. And when you're at that very bottom level, you haven't evolved yet, and maybe you never will, because look at you, you're using coercive power. This is yelling at other people. This is threatening people. This is demoting people. This is using the lower levels of power to get what you want. And unfortunately, there are some people that this is their thing. This is what gives them meaning in life. And when you see those people, run for the hills. And then there are two other types of power. Expert power. This is a person who knows so much and they're the expert witness. They're the person giving the TED Talk. They're just the expert. And so the power comes from that. And all of us will get there at some points in our lives as we keep focusing on evolving to be the best versions of ourselves. Then you are naturally going to be an expert in certain areas. And then you'll have the power that comes with that. And referent power is similar, but really what it is I live my life in a certain way. And you might see a person living their life and you respect them, and maybe you even want what they have. This is a referent power, and it's not asking for anything. The person who has this type of power, it's more of people want to be like them because of the way that they act. And Flagstaff, about a week ago, lost one of our greats, Jim Babbitt. He was a descendant of the Babbitt brothers who came to Flagstaff and along with the Reardons settled the community. So not just is he a descendant, but he's lived his whole life by these principles, and people loved him for it. And he cared about the city of Flagstaff like crazy, and he was always working to make it better. So that type of a power is just that comes from the way that we feel about Jim Babbitt. So that he had a type of referent power. Sorry, this is out of order. So again, there's one question, and it's about interpersonal influence tactics. And the question says something along the lines of, pick the one that is not a tactic for interpersonal influence. So in order to best answer it, you'll need to know the things that are. Take a sip of tea. All right, so the last chapter that I'm going to talk about is management communication. And like chapter 11, a large number of the questions come from this chapter. This is a stat I want you to know. 80%. And we talked about this in class, and I said that a whole bunch of this 80% is listening. No matter, listening is still communication. And managers spend at least 80% of their day doing this. And it includes emails, and it includes phone calls and conversations. Because communication. So there is a question on the final exam about strategic conversation. And when you think about the words strategic conversation, you might even think about a divisional structure or a flattened hierarchy where you have people and they're mingling and there's not a forbidden line of communication, authority line. So if it's flattened and I can walk right over to you and say to you, hey, let's talk about this idea. Strategic conversation has to do with a type of communication that is full of good ideas, big thinking across different boundaries. It's trying to get someplace new through communication. And one of the really big elements that I'd like for you to know is that a big part of having an excellent strategic conversation is to ask questions. Now, I know somebody who's a really, really good idea person, but he talks a lot and he does not listen. And asking question is a huge part of this strategic communication. So I noticed that somebody just put something in the chat. Do you have a question you want to ask out loud?
Oh, it was just a question about the slide prior to this.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that I had a photo of it.
Okay. Are you good now?
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. So yeah, know that to be a really good strategic conversationalist, you can't just be that person, and we all know them, who talks without listening, because that's not really a conversation, that is a broadcast. So asking questions is your primary goal in this idea. So you might remember the model that we looked at in class. Let me see if it's on the next. No, I didn't put it in here. So somebody has an idea, they encode their message, and then they choose the channel where they want it to go. And do you have a question? I hear somebody unmuted. A fellow throat clearer. Question? All right. So of all these different parts of the communication process, I want you to be able to know what a channel is. What channel are we on right now?
Zoom.
Thanks, Darren. Yes, we are. So that's the channel. So if I'm going to totally change things up and have you guys log off and go on to collaborate, then I'm changing the channel. So know what the channel is so that you can answer a final exam question related to channels. I know I have two daughters in their young 20s, and Snapchat, that's their channel. Me, I'm a texter, but it's all good. All right, what is open communication? I want for you to know about this. And we're in the last part of this. So if you're wondering how much energy do you have left in your brain, I'm probably going to talk for about 11 more minutes. So you might have heard me have a little bit of a bias about this when we talked about it in class. And the main reason is because I haven't really seen a whole lot of this in action done well. And I've had a bunch of different jobs and a bunch of different interactions with many companies. So I know this is a great idea, and I'm sure people do it well, but I just haven't seen a whole lot of it. But it is just like the words say, open communication. And a lot of people, employees, they really want to work for a place that has open communication, because it gives you a lot of freedom when you don't have to stress and worry about something and imagine the worst case scenario. You know exactly the way it is because of this open communication. So it's important for you to know this in your career, because the employees who are coming up are looking for organizations that don't just say they have open communication, but who really do. And that's going to matter more and more. I was a guest on a podcast yesterday, and I was talking about the truck driver shortage. And coming up next month, we're going to have a shortage of truck drivers, 80,000 people that they need to drive trucks that aren't driving trucks. And they can't pass the drug test because of the legalization of marijuana. And a lot of them just are getting other jobs as well. So it's kind of interesting. So if I know that I'm a truck driving company, I'm going to look at things that people are really wanting, and open communication is one of the things that I'm going to create as part of the culture. So picture what is communication within a centralized network versus a decentralized network. And with a centralized network, we're doing more of the tall structure, more of the traditional structure, more of a divisional structure, as opposed to the decentralized, which is a flattened hierarchy for the most part. And just like we saw with the matrix structure, people are confused when they have two bosses. I mean, wouldn't you be? So that would be, that's an aside. So how does the communication work in a centralized network? Well, it is helpful because I have a boss and I communicate to him. He communicates to his boss communicates to his boss, and his boss communicates to her, the CEO. So that line, that unity of command is the centralized network. And in terms of communication, it takes forever. I don't like that part of it, but I do like that I know exactly where to go when I need information because it's a centralized network. Now, in decentralization, it's not quite a free-for-all, but a little bit more of a free-for-all for sure compared to the unity of command. But when we have time-critical things, like an emergency is unfolding, this is another great way to have a decentralized network, to have people who are able to be decision makers at all levels because it's needed. Time is of the essence. I can't go to that boss, to that boss, to that boss. I don't have the time. I need it now. So they both have really important roles in our modern workplaces, but they're also on opposite ends of themselves. Here's just a picture of it. And you can see at the decentralized network, wow, I mean, it's nice to have that freedom, and it's easier to be an agile organization when you can make decisions and communicate with everybody at any time. But the centralized network is more traditional, and a lot of people like that. All right, so one or two questions about channel richness on the final. So remember in class, we talked about this. Face-to-face communication is the richest channel. And that's because when we're face-to-face, I can see your eyeballs. I can see your little facial tics. I can see your other nonverbal communication. I can see if you're nervous, if you're happy, if you're angry. So much more than our words are communicated. So face-to-face is huge. Zoom is pretty good. The phone is also pretty good. You can hear the pauses. You can hear the quiver in the voice. But then when you go all the way down the list to things like a memo or a letter or an email. Those are going to be one way. And then with a one-way communication, you're just not going to have much richness. Listening is one of the most important communication skills, and most managers who've been in management positions for a long time will tell you that it's the one skill that most people need a lot of work on. And it's good to know that, because very few people are really excellent listeners. So there's a lot of improvement for all of us. So a big change in management is using social media to interact with our customers, interact with our people, interact with other people in the industry. Social media has really changed a whole lot with the way that we do things. But one thing that it doesn't show a big change is that productivity is not drastically enhanced with the use of social media. Even though when I first read this research, I thought, that can't be true, can it? Because social media has made a lot of things easier, like easier to communicate with people. And I don't have to send a letter to my customers. I can just tweet to them or whatever. But it turns out that in terms of actual productivity, it hasn't changed a lot, even though some things have indeed become easier. So there's another question on the test, and I don't have a slide for it, but it's about make sure you know what is one-way communication and two-way communication. So right here, this is kind of a one-way communication because I'm just up here chatting. But if you unmute and ask a question, then all of a sudden it's a two-way communication. Or if you put something in the chat, then that is a two-way communication. So just, there is a question about one-way and two-way. So just understand what those are, please. On this slide, the one thing I want you to know is grapevine. So of all the types of information and communication, grapevine actually rises up pretty darn high. And it's kind of surprising because a lot of times we think about the grapevine as kind of like gossip. And why is that more powerful than an email? I'm not saying it's altogether more important, and especially the topic of an email. But if I hear something really juicy or really life-changing through the grapevine, that's a very effective mode of information traveling. And look at this stat here on the next page. So personal networking is important, but the question on the final is about the grapevine. So 90% of people say they participate in workplace gossip. That's a lot. And then not only that, but of all the information that is moving upward and downward, which we'll talk about in a moment, 70% of it is happening through the grapevine. So I want you to actually know that figure. If you're taking pictures, do it. Take a picture of that. So that's a lot. Even if you don't gossip, and gossip, yeah, there's all kinds of levels of gossip. I try never to say something that I wouldn't say in front of another person, like about that other person. But I for sure participate in gossip if somebody's telling me, hey, did you hear who left? Or do you hear about this new whatever? Yeah, I definitely am part of that 90%. All right, just a couple more slides and then we're done. Downward communication and upward communication. So downward is starting with the boss and going down, down, down to the front line or everywhere in between. And upward communication is me on the production line communicating upward to the boss and the boss's boss and the CEO president. That is upward communication. So when you think about what the communication is, the definition of it, then you'll be able to answer the questions on the exam. There's 2 or 3 about downward and upward. And downward communication is going to be me sharing the schedule for our class. That would qualify for downward communication. But in an organization, that's the CEO saying, hey, here are the latest things that have happened within our organization over the next month. And here's what's going to happen over the winter break. And these are some of our concerns for the spring semester. And you're all still wearing masks. That's coming from up above, and it's filtering down to all of us as a downward communication. Now, an upward communication is going to be things like suggestions. You might have, like my friend who's quitting her job because she has too many suggestions. Yeah, I get it. They don't want suggestions. They're having a hard enough time just doing their jobs. But if I do have suggestions for the management, me sending it that way is an upward communication. If I have a concern in my class, for example, like if I caught somebody cheating, I have to put it in an email and do an upward communication to the associate dean, who sends it to his dean, and there's this whole process. So that's upward, me communicating up. And the 2 questions are about, these are examples. Is this upward or downward? Something like that. So just make sure that you review these before the exam and know the difference. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Does anybody need it up there for a second more? So I'm going to take your questions after I